Go ahead.
Okay, so the Garden of Valor was something I just fell into. My dad had played with Chuck Wayne, who owned the Garden of Valor, and his brother Blackjack Wayne owned the Dream Bowl in Napa. But the garden was like right there in Niles, and you went down the highway, you down this little driveway, and here's this dance hall. Must have, I mean, it looked like it was already 50 years old then. And there was a bar in the back, and they had a bandstand. And what happened was that this guy, Roy Young, ran away to be a preacher in the Midwest, but he knew me and he said, Jimmy, you want this gig? Because I'm leaving. And Chuck knows you. And Chuck said, yeah, why don't you let Jimmy come in? So I did. And I became the band leader. It was really tough because all the rest of the guys in that house band were older than me. And Chuck used to say, knock their heads together if they're late coming back from those breaks. You know, which I was going to do that. So I just go up and play guitar early before the break was over and they'd come up, right? But that's when I started playing on the bill with, like, Chuck had people like Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and you name it, you know, he had them there. And I think even Carl Perkins. And so what happened was Tom Donahue had the record hop on Friday night, and Saturday night the garden was country western. Unless they had somebody like Johnny Cash in town. And he'd stay on the property, just like Jerry Lee did. And they would do both nights. So, but Friday night, I kind of had the free reign and everything, but I just did what Tom Donahue said. He did the announcement, there was a raffle, and then there would be a local famous person like maybe Dick and Dee Dee or something, or Bobby Freeman, you know. But then they'd have out-of-towners, like the guy that played or sang Mission Bell, you know. And I'll never forget that he was up in the loft and everything, and they said he's paranoid about coming down. His name was Donnie Brooks. And he was afraid because the record had all these group singers in the background and everything. It was a typical top 40 thing. So I went up and talked to him. I said, man, come on down and just do some rock and roll live, okay? We worked out, and I rehearsed the tune with him upstairs, and we went down. And everything was fine. But two things about the garden blew my mind. One was, I went in the back where the bar is, and Chuck said, you know I'm not supposed to be in here, Jimmy, right? I said, no, I ought to ask you a question, Chuck, that's all. And I looked, and it was Gene Vincent behind the bar, bartending. And I said, is that Gene Vincent? And Chuck said, yeah, and he's drinking me out of house at home here. Because he knew Chuck, and he was back there just pouring him for the people and himself, right? So Gene got up and sat in with the band, and I didn't know he had a brace on his leg because he'd been in an accident with Eddie Cochran, and he'd gotten crippled in England. And Eddie Cochran didn't make it, but he did. So after that, I noticed that. But the biggest letdown was we were going to play with Johnny Burnett. He was from Memphis area. He was out here doing the circuit. We're all excited, dreaming. You're 16, so we're learning those tunes and everything. And then Chuck called us aside. He says, it doesn't look like that's going to happen with Johnny. I said, why? He said, because while he was out here, he was up at Clear Lake and he drowned.
Mm. Oh.
And it was just such a letdown. But it was, you know, people like that didn't die. You know what I mean? Like that. So that's one thing that was great about the garden. So, you know, I mean, it was, you know, I'd be on the bill with people. And of course, what I mean on the bill is you might play at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and then they'll bring Johnny Cash in at 7:30, right? You know what I mean? And there might be another group on there, just like Bill's stuff, you know, but you're still on the bill with these people. With Dwayne Eddy, I was the only other band on the bill. But so I got to do the TV show every Saturday. Chuck had the Black Jack Wayne show on Channel 2. So I got to do the TV show. And I was going to high school. I'm on TV every Saturday. So it was great publicizing the garden gig, what's going on there, Tom Donahue and everything. But they just had me go out and just sing, and they go, Jimmy's going to be there, and who else is going to be there with you, Jimmy? And then I'd say whoever it was going to be, and yeah, Tom Donahue's going to be there. We're going to have a real good time. And so that's kind of was it. I got a TV show out of it. I'd never been in TV that much. I think I did one talent show on TV when I was 13 or something like that. It wasn't, but this was every week. And across the set was the Cotton C. Clarke show, another country guy. And he'd have people like George Jones and Rose Maddox and all of these early country western people. George wasn't that huge then. But I'd be across the set from them, you know, all these musicians. And I was just really blessed, man, because, you know, my dad's guitar players were showing me things. My dad taught me first. My Uncle Joe, Seif, taught me the theory on the neck. And my Uncle Walt, you know, just anybody that would give me something, I just wanted to learn it. That's why by the time I was 16, I went pro. So I was lucky. But the doo-wop groups, that's what really projected me. And by the way, I want to say this. I had a rough time growing up because my dad was in country music, redneck music. I learned how to play it to keep him happy, but black music was what inspired me the most. I like the guitar playing, I like some country artists, but if it wasn't for black culture, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. That's where the music came from.
You got bit by the R&B bug, didn't you?
Well, that was the drug of choice, man.
In
I mean,
in Hayward, that was.
I remember,
that was the
check this
top
out. Do you
thing.
remember the first time I was with Benny and What I Say came on the radio, and I was going to high school, and Benny pulled over into this parking lot in Hayward, right on A Street, and stopped. And we listened to that. And we never heard anything like it in our lives. And it was like, God,
Yeah.
what was that? And then I wanted to sound like Ray. So I started doing stuff like that. But my dad would get upset with me, you know, wanted to be black in music and everything. I didn't want to be black. I just wanted to be able to do it like they did because of the fact that they had that fire, man. They had that beat, you know, and stuff. And my dad and some of the people around my folks probably said, "You're going to let Jimmy do that kind of music? How come he ain't doing the..." But I learned all the country stuff from my dad, and I learned the jazz stuff and everything. He grew up with it, but I used to sneak off to go to the doo-wop rehearsal. I didn't tell my dad where I was going, man. I said, I'm going down to hang out with my, you know, with my black friends, man, because they were the ones that were exciting, right? Let's face it, man.
So when Isley Brothers Shout came out, you must have lost your mind.
What? Oh,
Isley Brothers Shout?
Can I tell you about that?
Yeah.
We were on the bill with Joe Simon, and that was his main show song.
Oh.
And he was out there doing it for maybe 20 minutes. And he's a little bit softer now. He'd go down,
Right.
and with the band, it'd have to be this soft. And he would build it up and build it up and build it up. And that was his main thing. And it was the most amazing, because I never saw the Isley Brothers. I don't think anybody performed it like Joe Simon. He had Drowning in the Sea of Love, you know, some hit records when I was in the Army. But man, what a show. And his managers were this elderly couple. And they probably turned loose of him, but he was just amazing. He hit these high notes, the high falsetto, you know, all the stuff you saw people later on do, like Joe Simon was doing that. He was like, you know, for me, man, that was just being on the bill, being in the dressing room, and just witnessing that education I got. Let me tell you, man, I got an education because I just always was tuned into it going, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know,